Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second live event. And I think and hope that we have all the technical issues worked out that were problematic on our first go round. Tonight, we'll be discussing a very hot topic and one that we've actually had a lot of requests for, especially Professor Jacobson's knowledge on the subject, and that's From Campus to Culture, a Pandemic of Free Speech Repression. Last time we discussed constitutional rights in the age of government overreach, and so this will be an extension of that, focusing primarily on free speech. And so I want to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the senior contributing editor at the Legal Insurrection blog, where I've been for 5.5, getting close to 6 years now. And I also work as the operations officer and director of editorial development with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, which is a separate entity. And to that end, we are a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. We are purely supported by donations, and the blog is a project of the foundation. Today is also Giving Tuesday, so if you are interested and contributing, every single dollar matters. We run a very, very, very lean operation. We don't spend a penny more than we have to. So you can rest assured that when you do donate to us, your money goes to a good cause, and that cause is educational activities like this, which we are proud and thankful that we can offer for free. And also to investigations, which Professor Jacobson can share a little bit more about. We do a lot of that. And then the blog, of course, we work really hard to cover stories that are underrepresented and largely ignored by the media, to dig deeper into things. We do a lot of, well, actually, because it's amazing the things that are misreported en masse. But in the spirit of giving, if you would like to donate, you can do so on our blog, and I can share a link on Facebook Live. I'll do that in the comments. Before we get started, this is an interactive event, so Professor Jacobson, who will introduce himself momentarily, will be answering questions. If you have questions throughout, I will be watching that, so please feel free to engage. Please feel free to interact. Ask your questions. That's what we're here for. Not just to give you fantastic information on this particular subject, but we're here to answer your questions since we can't get out and about just yet to do that in person. This is the next best thing. So again, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We hope you find this enjoyable and informative. And ask your questions, comments, all of the above. I'll be watching all of that. And I'm going to turn it over to Professor Jacobson, who is the publisher of the Legal Insurrection blog, and is also the president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and is also a law professor at Cornell Law School. So without further ado, Professor Jacobson.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is a little bit of a strange experience, speaking into a screen, although I've done that a few times for TV appearances. But it's what we're able to do. As many of you know, the hope was to take us on the road. We were in Los Angeles area, Southern California in February. We had a free speech tour planned for 3 major universities in Florida in March, the end of March, and that obviously didn't happen because everything started shutting down. The campuses started shutting down, the airlines started shutting down. When we get on the road next will really depend on conditions. It's possible mid to late summer. I think more realistic is probably in the fall. And in my public appearances, I frequently have spoken about free speech issues, particularly free speech issues that relate to campus and how they have moved from campus to culture. And I've done many appearances on that topic. And that's really what I'm going to speak about a little bit about tonight. Presentation will hopefully be about a half hour, and then we can have questions. Okay, first glitch of the day, which is the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so that's me, and again, clinical professor of law at Cornell Law School, founder and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation. And many of you know us from the Legal Insurrection website, and started in 2008 And the foundation launched a little bit over a year ago on March 1 of 2019. And Kimberly is our Director of Operations for the foundation, and also obviously one of the editors and contributors at the website. So just to preview you, because one of the things I teach students and one of the philosophies I have is the so-called 3-step sales test or sales presentation, which is first you tell people what you are going to tell them, then you tell it to them, and then you tell them what you told them. And that's the approach I give in my speeches, and that's the approach I'll do now. So here's a preview. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to focus on the threat to free speech, which I think is really unprecedented in this time of pandemic. But all of the pieces have been there for a decade, 2 decades, and they've been there on campuses. And those threats to free speech are both legal in the sense that if you're on a campus or in a location where the First Amendment applies, meaning you're not on private property, then you have those First Amendment protections. But there's also the practical limitations on free speech, which is what impacts us a lot more, which is the social media mobbing and the clampdown on social media by companies. So I'm going to talk about those and this transition from campus to current. One thing I'm not really going to spend any time or much time on tonight is what I spoke about in our last live event, which is lockdown issues, the restrictions on movement, the restrictions on the ability to protest. Those can be free speech issues, but otherwise we'd be going for 3 hours tonight. And so I'm not really going to get very heavily into those. I'm going to focus more on free speech issues on social media, on campuses, and elsewhere. So my overview, my thesis here is that what started on campus is viewing speech you disagree with as a form of violence. And if anybody spent any time on a campus in the last decade, you know that that is a very frequent formulation, that your words actually are physical violence. And that's something that I think people of my generation, maybe even the generation after me, are not used to hearing. But the younger generation, that is something that's very common on campus, that words are violence. And that that dangerous approach to free speech has moved from campus to social media, and the pandemic is accelerating that problem. So that's an overview of my viewpoint here. And at the end of it, I'll also talk to you about what are some of the things I think we need to do. The progress of tonight is to go over some of the campus shoutdowns and silencing, how first they came after Jewish students and pro-Israel students on campuses. And this has been really, if I look back at the history of Legal Insurrection website, these are the things we've been covering for 12 years. And so I'll pull some examples from our past on the website, but this is a progression that I've actually witnessed and documented in real time. I didn't necessarily know in real time the transition was taking place, but looking back upon it, it's pretty obvious. Then they came for conservatives on campuses. Then the people who did this graduated and they brought the campus to high tech. And a lot of these concepts of words being violence, of all of those sort of things are now very common in the high tech industry. And they don't shout you down now, they deplatform you. And there is a growing embrace of non-freedom of speech. So it's not simply that they oppose free speech, but there is a movement that I'll show you to actually embrace the lack of freedom of speech as a good thing. And then I'll go over what I think we can do, or some of the things. It started with the shoutdowns of Israelis and pro-Israel students. Post I wrote back in 2017 really traced the history of this, that how with campus shoutdowns, first they came for the Jews in Israel. This was at a time when there were a lot of disruptions on college campuses of conservative speakers, and I wanted to point out that that's not where it started. very famous incident at York University. And I'm going to see if I can get the YouTube to load out of PowerPoint. There we go. Hopefully you are seeing that. And hopefully this will work. So you can see, this was an appearance by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Summer is resolved to stop it. So he challenges the police.
You can see what's going on here is pretty violent. It's at York University, or Concordia, I'm sorry, up in Canada, where they literally broke the glass and banged on the windows to try to prevent Netanyahu from speaking. I think you get the idea there. And so this is the sort of things, this is in the late 90s, between Netanyahu's various prime ministerships. And so you can see this is the sort of thing that went on. It also took place in the infamous Irvine, California, Irvine, when Ambassador Michael Oren went to speak there.
Getting murder is not an expression of free speech.
You know him?
Guilty of 101.
First nation on earth to recognize.
And so you can see that that's these disruptions, banging on windows, trying to prevent someone to speak, was becoming very prevalent whenever an Israeli or pro-Israel speaker would appear. This was an incident that we covered extensively at Legal Insurrection at the University of Texas in Austin. An event being held by the Israel Studies Department was disrupted by Palestinian Solidarity Committee, the equivalent of Students for Justice in Palestine.
No, we know we have an introduction. We want to introduce you as well.
They tried to hijack the whole event.
We're making an intervention.
Get out of my face. If you want to learn, stay out. If you don't want to learn, please.
That's the professor whose event is being disrupted, an Israeli
You have
professor.
some nerve to come to a class and instead of listening to no,
We don't want to listen. We don't want to listen to your whitewashing. We don't want to listen to your whitewashing. We know who you are. We read your stuff.
That's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the fact that the Center for Israeli Studies exists on our campus to whitewash the state of Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. It doesn't matter. You are a former IDF soldier. We do not listen to you. You have nothing to say to us.
So that was a disruption of a university event. Believe it or not, they filed a complaint against the professor, which was investigated and eventually dismissed for kicking them out of the event that they were disrupting. This is a particularly brutal one in Galway, University of Galway. If you have young children watching, you may want to mute it because it's pretty brutal. But it's even worse in some European places than here.
You're fucking Zionist fucking pricks. Get the fuck up now. Get off my campus now. I've been at campus for 10 years. Get the fuck off our campus now. Get off the campus.
So I think that you, again, get the feel of that. That was a lecture by a professor at another British university, not even by an Israeli, but they didn't like his viewpoint on Israel. It also has taken place at many American universities as well. This is a disruption of a professor who's a fairly mild-mannered guy, a law professor, Eugene Kontorovich, a really great scholar. They shouted down his at the University of Chicago Law School, where he was giving a guest appearance. The AMCA initiative, a wonderful group out of California that documents problems with these disruptions on campuses, has started creating a list. Now, at least on their website, it only goes back to 2015. Of course, this has been a problem for a decade before that. And they have, if you can see it at the bottom of the screen, documented 162 events where there was disruption or a shout down of Israeli or pro-Israel events on campuses. So it is pervasive, it is extremely widespread. But it started in many ways with the pro-Israel speakers, but it has gone to what I would call non-liberal speakers on campuses. Doesn't even have to necessarily be what we would call a conservative speaker, however you want to define that, but it's somebody who does not adhere to the prevailing viewpoints. Again, things we've documented for years at Legal Insurrection. Cornell, very well-known founder, one of the founders of the Tea Party movement, was invited to speak on campus by the nonpartisan Cornell Political Union, and there were such threats against his event that campus security told the sponsor of the event that they had to pay $2,000 in security fees. They said, well, we don't have $2,000. They said, well, you have to make the event private. So they effectively got deplatformed on campus. They were allowed to hold the event, but it had to be at a non-disclosed location. Well, the protesters found out where they were anyway, and tried to shout it down and shut it down unsuccessfully. That's at Cornell. Cornell also, Rick Santorum was heckled pretty significantly. Did not stop the speech, but it was a significant disruption. Of course, wherever Heather McDonald goes, and there are many other people, for each of these examples, whether it's for the Israeli speakers or whether it's for the non-liberal speakers, for every one I'm showing you, I could give you dozens and dozens of other examples. It is so pervasive that Heather McDonald is often not allowed to speak or disrupted because she has a differing factual take on various issues regarding the social justice movement, race relations, things like that. If a government official who's not considered acceptable appears on campus, there's going to be a disruption. This was at Georgetown that we wrote about. One of the most famous is Middlebury College, the disruption of Charles Murray there. That gathered a lot of attention. Let's see if this YouTube plays. That got a lot of press because towards the end of it, the event was disrupted. The professor from Middlebury who had invited Charles Murray to campus was actually physically assaulted by students. So that event was shut down, gathered national attention. Charles Murray was somewhat secretly invited back onto the campus a year or so later by, I think, the Republican Club or something like that. But the point is that if you're going to appear on campus, a couple of things happen. The first thing is that you're accused of being hateful, you're accused of inciting violence, you're accused of being racist, you're accused of being all sorts of isms. And those are the excuses that that sort of speech should not be allowed on campus because it's physically damaging to people. Takes place at law schools, CUNY Law School, a conservative professor, someone who's really establishing, a rising star. Josh Blackman was disrupted at CUNY Law School, that's City University of New York. And he doesn't have any views that are really outside the mainstream of conservatism, legal conservatism. So you don't need to be a radical, you don't need to be far right, you don't need to be anything like that to be disrupted on campuses. The FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, another great organization, has actually a database of another phenomenon, which is speakers being disinvited. So you don't even get onto campus to speak where you'd be disrupted, that the invitation to you is revoked because of objections from people. Of course, I've spoken about many times my own experience at Vassar. Hopefully I won't be repeating myself too much, but some of the people watching may not have heard about that. That was in 2017. So I was invited to speak at Vassar on the issue of free speech and hate speech, and had the constitutional view that even what we frequently refer to as hate speech is actually constitutionally protected. That is an opinion which was completely unacceptable on Vassar. So because I was appearing to espouse that accurate description of what the status of the law is, forget whether it's my personal view or anything like that, I was simply wanting to inform people that that is what our constitutional principles are. And I do agree with it, but because of that, there was an attempt to keep me off campus, a complete meltdown among the radical student body who organized campus-wide meetings to prepare for me appearing, spread false rumors that I was a white supremacist and I was bringing my white nationalist followers to campus to attack people, complete fabrication. They organized security details for the night that I was arriving, but only after the student government demanded the president cancel my appearance, which she refused to do. Fortunately, I don't think she was happy with the situation, but she did allow me to appear on campus. I appeared with security. They had set up safe spaces. You've heard about safe spaces. There literally were safe spaces set up. There were teams of students, safety teams, who had glow sticks to lead students who felt threatened by my appearance to these safe spaces. One of the safe spaces was the library at the school. In the library, and I kid you not, they made available to students who were stressed by my being on campus coloring books to help them work through their stress. The event did actually take place. If there hadn't been all these protests, there probably would have been 30 people there. Instead, there were close to 300 students there. It ended up being a great evening, and hopefully one day you'll get to see the videos of it. But one thing that I learned is that the students there, based on over an hour of questioning and answer, really don't understand our constitutional principles, don't understand the value of free speech. It's not something they've been taught about. And they express these same sentiments that I've described of hate speech, what they call hate speech, being speech they hate, being a physical danger to them.
All right, real quickly, I do have a question. This is coming from Facebook Live. It's about the campus issues. This is from Eric, and Eric says, coronavirus is going to cause a massive cash crunch on colleges nationwide and maybe result in numerous campus closures and/or cutbacks. I have a little helper here. How do you think campus closures and cutbacks will affect the extent and spread of the anti-Israel and anti-free speech crowd?
Well, I think that it's going to worsen the situation, at least with respect to anti-free speech issues. A little harder to tell on the anti-Israel issues. I think that the campuses being essentially depopulated has made it more difficult for people to organize the sort of protests and resolutions and things like that. I'm sure they'll figure out a way around it. But one of the things I'm going to talk about towards the end of this is that I think that this is going to make the concept of inclusiveness, and which is a catch-all phrase, which says we need to have everybody feel included on this campus. And therefore, if you say something that makes someone feel not included, that is speech that's not allowed on campus. But of course, who gets to define what is inclusiveness and things like that? So I think it's actually going to make the situation worse once students come back on campus. The fact that campuses have been depopulated, I think, makes it difficult to really see any patterns yet. So moving on to how this shutdown has moved to social media, where most of us, or most of you, are probably familiar with the deplatforming. So now they don't shout you down, they deplatform you. You get kicked off. And it can be conspiracy theorists, conspiracy people who mistakenly get described in the media as right-wing. They're not right-wing, they're just conspiracy theorists, and there are tons of them who are espousing it from the other side of the political spectrum, but they're getting kicked off. But it's not just those people who are getting kicked off, and because it always starts with that extreme, and then it starts to move towards the center. One of the things we faced on this lovely platform, Facebook, is ridiculous fact-checking that is used as an excuse to throttle our ability to reach people. So we got flagged for a post that one of our authors had written back in January. I didn't find out about this until much later, and I'll tell you in a second how I found out about it. And we got flagged as spreading false information. And it absolutely was not false information. It was about the Australian wildfires and how they were started. That's what we said. They were caused by bad land management and arsonists. But one of the Facebook fact check organizations decided that Legal Insurrection and anybody else who did not include climate change as a contributing factor was spreading false information. So even though from Australian sources, there were, I think, 100 or more or thereabouts arson fires set and the land management. So this is Facebook imposing on not conspiracy theorists, but people who are just reporting the facts as they see them and flagging it. And what it meant is that when you get flagged, it means nobody can share it. You get that warning. Here's their fact check that it was misleading to not include climate change as a factor in the fires. But here's what it meant for us, and here's how I found out about it. We don't advertise anymore on Facebook. There was a time we tried it many years ago. So we have a very organic growth, much like the website. People like our content, so they come to it. And our posts normally will get in the hundreds of shares, sometimes in the thousands of shares. And all of a sudden, one day, I'm realizing we're not getting our posts shared. We're not reaching people. Something strange is really going on here. And you can see how we dropped off from reaching 60,000 people a day to reaching fewer than 10,000 a day. So we're cut whatever that percentage is. And I finally figured out why. I had to email. I found somebody at Facebook. I found somebody who knew somebody who dealt with these things at Facebook. And I was told this is why. This and another one similar where we got flagged. And this is what happens. So it's a minefield out there where you can see the dramatic drop-off because of these. We've cleared ourselves now from some of this throttling, but it's a risk. The Facebook fact checkers only seem to fact check certain content and not other content. It's made even worse by groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and there are many others, it's not just them, who provide these handy guides to places like Facebook and to people out there to tell you where various groups have their websites hosted and where they're doing their payment processing, like PayPal and those sort of things, and where their advertising revenues come from, so that if you want to try to disrupt that, which is Media Matters, Expertise, and there's other groups now who do that, try to attack advertisers, they're telling you where to go. That's the only reason they have this there. They're telling you to go to GoDaddy or go to Network Solutions or go to these other places and tell them they shouldn't be hosting these groups. Now, who are these groups? These are groups like Act for America, the David Horowitz Freedom Center. But these are people who get pegged by the thoroughly dishonest Southern Poverty Law Center, totally politically motivated. We've written dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of posts about the Southern Poverty Law Center, how politicized they've become. But this is the sort of thing that's going on. So it moved from shouting people down on campus to throttling them with, fact checks that are politicized, to deplatforming them, to telling people where to go to get them kicked off of their hosting services and how to go after the entities they use to process donations.
Okay, so I do have another question. This question also comes from Facebook Live, and it is talking about deplatforming. And this question is from Ray. And Ray asks, what is your guess on what is going to happen if Trump gets reelected on the broad immunity that internet giants have? Sometimes they are a publisher and other times they're not. So they can deplatform you since they're private, but they can't be sued since they're a publisher. It's a great question.
Well, I think what it is, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think there might be public pressure put on these groups, but I don't think the law is going to be changed. And I'm not convinced it should be changed, because what the law people are talking about says, kind of in broad strokes, is that if you maintain a web platform that allows other people to speak and you do not, beyond a certain threshold, decide what gets published, contribute to it, etc. That's not saying you can't do anything, but you don't become the publisher of that information. You can't be sued. So if somebody posts a YouTube video, and in that YouTube video, they might defame somebody, YouTube can't be sued merely for hosting it. And that makes a lot of sense for internet freedom, because otherwise you could never have hosting platforms like YouTube, Facebook, or any place else where tens of millions of people express viewpoints every day, or Twitter. Now, at what point does this throttling, does this politicization, does this intervention cross that threshold? That's what is getting people frustrated, that if you're going to so monitor and so skew the conversations through your community standards, et cetera, maybe you are becoming a publisher. I'm not sure that would be a good thing. It would cause many websites, if not most, to simply eliminate their comment sections because you would then be held responsible for everything that every commenter said on your website. And so I'm not sure that's a good thing, but that doesn't mean that there aren't problems with the way these massive platforms are handling things. And really, when you think about it, Facebook, which owns Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, these have become near monopolies or oligopolies that control so much. I mean, as many problems as we've had with Facebook, and as frustrating as it can be, you can't not be there. Same with Twitter and the same with YouTube. And so I think it's a problem. I don't think the law will be changed, but I think there will be pressure brought to bear on the biggest of companies to make it a more level playing field.
So I do have another question for you, and this is just more for discussion purposes, because it's something that came up in the last live event on constitutional rights, but it's not something that we discussed at length. And it was the problem that's created when Facebook begins aligning with government entities. We'd done a post in which we discussed how reports indicated that Facebook was removing group events that would violate any kind of government ordinance. So the specific example being, if an organization, a church, or whatever, just individuals were organizing something that violated a quarantine order or a social distancing order, then Facebook was complying with local government and municipality requests to remove those events. What is your take on that? And does that complicate the issue of free speech and their role in free speech?
Well, I think that to the extent that they are acting at the request of government to silence speech, which is not itself unlawful. The speech isn't unlawful. The perhaps gathering, the actual event, and this could of course be challenged in the courts, but the event may or may not be lawful, but the speech and the organizing and the advocacy is certainly lawful. And so I think that these media giants, particularly Facebook, are putting themselves in legal jeopardy of maybe crossing a line where they are acting as an agent of the government. And so if the government calls up Facebook and says, or the governor calls up Facebook and says that I want you to shut down this event being organized on your platform, well, why don't First Amendment standards apply to that, whereas they may not otherwise apply to Facebook? I don't know what the conclusion is there, but I think they're putting themselves at risk in that fashion. And are they applying this across the board? Are they shutting down every event, or are they only shutting down some events? And so I think those are the issues. But that's one of the more troubling things, where the government essentially co-opts supposedly private media to do the government's job, or what they think their job is, but it's not. So we've got this history, campus, we've got this history, social media, big tech, and then came the pandemic that we're going through now, and the reason that we're doing this not in person someplace. And the last time I did point out, and this goes to the prior question, how YouTube took the position that if you advocate anything that goes against what the World Health Organization says the proper health procedure is, then you're going to get kicked off. Well, there was a time when the World Health Organization said we shouldn't have travel restrictions. So if you had gone on YouTube and said, well, wait a second, there's this virus, it's starting in a region in China, maybe we should shut off travel from that region to the United States or from that country, you would have been going against what the World Health Organization says, and then you would have been kicked off YouTube. But that, in fact, is our policy. That's the policy in much of the world. The World Health Organization changed that recommendation, and we can go into face masks and a whole other sorts of stuff. And so this shows how ludicrous it is for YouTube to try to be the arbitrator of what is acceptable and what is not. We've also talked about Facebook, and this is what we just touched upon, how Facebook said that they were going to remove harmful information. But again, a lot of that goes to various remedies and various things, which are contested as to whether certain sorts of drugs could be beneficial or not beneficial. And this is, again, the issue of them shutting down platforms at the request of states that the prior question went to. But there's something even worse going on. This is somebody who's a law professor at Columbia University. I had to look him up, never heard of him. And this is a deleted tweet because he got so much pushback on it. What's happening is that people are taking the pandemic and saying that if you advocate something we disagree with about the pandemic or the health measures, you're not simply somebody we disagree with, you're somebody who's dangerous. That just like the students on campuses say, your words are violence, they're now saying that your words are dangerous, a danger to public health. And so this law professor asked the question, which is more important, freedom of speech or freedom from propaganda? In the context, I think it was pretty clear what his view is, although this just leaves it open-ended. And he's not alone. There is a push to have social media monitor and decide what should be said about this virus, and to kick people off who disagree with them. Jonathan Turley, law professor, gained a lot of fame because of the impeachment hearings, where he was a dissenting voice, put it that way. And he has pointed out that this it is now becoming mainstreaming in the context of this pandemic to support filters for what is acceptable free speech, and that it's not simply the extremes, that what happens is that people call people who disagree with them an extreme, a racist, alt-right, etc., even when it's not true, as an excuse to get them kicked off. And Turley, in his opinion at the Hill, talked about a message that Adam Schiff, a government official, well known to you, sent to the executives of Google, Twitter, and YouTube, demanding that they censor anything deemed misinformation or false information. Well, who gets to decide that? Because if I got to decide it, then Adam Schiff wouldn't be allowed to appear on any of those platforms, if that's the standard, because he puts out a lot of misinformation and false information, but he wants others to be kicked off because of that. The YouTube kicked off some doctors who had a dissenting view on the statistics for the pandemic. That got a lot of attention as well. Even mainstream journalism journals are talking about whether they should be fighting misinformation and censoring people and so on. The internet speech, really horrible article at The Atlantic by two professors of law who wrote that the private sector is now taking over what states in totalitarian places used to carry out in terms of censorship, and that in a statement that's gotten a lot of attention, that in the great debate of the past 2 decades about freedom versus control of the internet, China was largely right and the US was largely wrong, which is quite an astounding statement. It will come back to campus full circle, and this goes to the question earlier about what's the campus environment going to be like. Well, one of the things we're going to see is, and it's already happened, it's happened at Illinois, and it's happened at many campuses where they insist that referring to the virus as in any way related to China, whether you call it Wuhan virus, Wuhan coronavirus, Chinese virus, any attempt to refer to the virus as having come from China is unacceptable. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot of that, and I think that's going to be a hot topic of conversation on campuses, an attempt to control the speech on campuses. So what to do? I think that a lot, and this is a point I've made at prior presentations, a lot of this goes back to how the Tea Party organized. One of the great mass movements was online, but it was also through interconnections, through local grassroots movements, which had their own lists and their own listservs and their own websites and the thriving conservative blogosphere. So we should use social media to our advantage, but we can't abandon those grassroots, face-to-face, non-social media means of communicating with people and to build communities that can't be deplatformed. And that's one of the things we're trying to do at Legal Insurrection, is build a community and an interconnection that's not completely dependent on Facebook, because who knows when, for whatever the reason, we get kicked off of Facebook. So a couple of more questions that were put on the website. Somebody asked this point about using the term Wuhan virus, which I believe is a perfectly acceptable term. Wuhan is a place, it's not a race. And being called racist, and this is what's happening on campuses. Do I have any suggestions as to how to handle this? Well, the first thing is don't change your speech patterns. If your speech is acceptable, keep it up, but also turn it back on them. Say, no, you're the racist because you're assuming that when we refer to a geographic location, we're referring to all people, no matter how many generations removed, who came from that location. And that's not what we're referring to. That's not how it's understood. So you're the person who's racist by assuming that that's what we're meaning. So I think you have to turn it against people. But this is going to be a problem. This is a problem already on cable news. It's a problem on social media, that any attempt to accurately reflect where this virus came from is going to get accused of being racist. Another question goes to the fact of how can we can't really avoid using Facebook. So how strange is it that I'm having a discussion about the problems of Facebook and the limitations on free speech on social media on a platform that is part of the problem? And that goes back to the issue that I think we use it while we can, we use it to our advantage, but have a plan B and have a plan C, because you may get kicked off of this for reasons that never get explained to you. And you don't want to put all your eggs in the Facebook and Twitter and YouTube basket. You need to diversify, and you need to build a community that we're trying to do outside of these platforms. We don't depend on these platforms for the majority of our website traffic. I forget what the exact percentage is, but I think between Facebook and Twitter combined, maybe 20% of our traffic comes from those platforms. If we lost them, of course, we'd be very unhappy, but it wouldn't really destroy the main purpose of our website. Most of our website traffic comes from people who just come to the website, and they do so periodically, some every day, some once a week. It's so-called organic traffic. And then referrals, a much smaller amount, by other websites that link to us. So I don't know if there are any more questions, Kimberly, that other than the ones you've asked that have come in while we've been live here.
No, no more questions there. I am about to post the donation link because, again, just to remind you, it is Giving Tuesday. So if you enjoyed what you saw this evening, and if you learned something, every single penny counts, and I promise that we put it to very good use. And you can donate very easily online through PayPal, however works best for you. If you're old school and want to write a check, the information for that is there as well. We do look forward to hosting more live events, and we want to thank you for taking time and spending time with us online this evening. And for our readers who participated, when we are doing these live events, we solicit questions in advance on the blog, which is legalinsurrection.com if you're new here. But again, we want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to spend it with us. There's also a link if you go to our Facebook page. If you'd like to know more, if you'd like to be able to get our content, we have a weekday newsletter called Morning Insurrection. We don't spam, we don't sell your information, we just share our fantastic content with you every weekday morning, and you can sign up for that on our Facebook page. Again, that's free. Another thing that we give you for free. But again, thank you so much for your time, and stay tuned. We do have more events that we're working on currently. Will probably be a little bit more personable, and that we're working on trying to get something together where we could actually chat with you virtually, as opposed to just taking your questions live. But again, thank you so much for your time, and Professor Jacobson, wonderful as always. Is there anything else you have?
Nope. Thank you all for coming here, and we will see you again.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Good night.